Gary Troop has over 30 years experience in the field of program management, and he's seen it from all sides. From the side of the federal government, in construction management, as a software developer, and in aerospace and defense contracting. He's developed a number of software programs. He's the founder of CS Solutions, which brought us wInsight. And recently, he's the founder of Encore Analytics. So could you begin with just telling me your story about how it all started with wInsight, or even before that, like where you feel like the beginning is, that people would like to know?
Sure. So, I don't think anybody goes to college, well, maybe today they didn't, but back then, going into project management, it was really not a big known field to go into. So I was in ROTC, and my plan was to go into the Air Force and fly airplanes, preferably an A-10 fighter. The problem was there were too many pilots left over at that time in the Air Force in Vietnam.
This is about, so this is in the...
79. Actually 78, December of 78. I came in January of 79. And so what they would do is they'd send lieutenants to different places. And so I wasn't quite sure where to go. My dad was a colonel in the Air Force, and he was the comptroller at Eglin, one of the 4 acquisition bases. Oh. And so he was the top financial guy. He was very instrumental in bringing cost estimating into the Air Force, the parametric cost estimating, very smart guy. And he said the place that I belonged was out in Los Angeles at Los Angeles Air Force Station, where they did the space work. It was probably one of the laxer bases in terms of being a real military installation. He thought I would fit better there. So he convinced me to apply for that, and then I ended up out there in the GPS program. And so that's where I learned program management. I had a great boss out there that I think was a visionary in this, and also was technically very astute. And so I learned about budgeting, scope management, scheduling there, and I did a lot of earned value reviews for the Air Force.
Now, you say you did earned value reviews. Did the term exist at the time?
No, it was
okay.
Cost schedule control systems at the time.
Okay.
And so I went to AFIT and took a course, and a couple other places, and so I would do analysis of contractors' data, and I would review their systems. And I met a pretty woman out there in Los Angeles that had her own business, and she was very successful. And so that started me thinking about what I really wanted to do. And so I decided I was going to marry her, and she wasn't willing to move around, so I shifted gears. And I went to work for a company that won a contract to automate the financial systems at Space Division. And I was their functional person. I understood budgeting, budget execution, earned value analysis, so I would advise the programmers about what to do, what to build, what it needed to look like, what it needed to do. And that's how I got into computers. I didn't like computers in college. I took one class with punch cards and I hated it. But at that moment in time, the first PCs came out, and I was drawn to those. It was no longer punch cards, it was interactive. And so
again, around what year is that now?
That was 83.
83, okay.
80, right around 83.
Okay.
And so I found that I had a knack with computers, personal computers.
This is back in the DOS time, right?
It was DOS. CPM was around, if you remember that. CPM 86 was the competing operating system.
Right.
And so we built, actually the first tools we built were on VAX 11780s, which were mini computers built by VAX, and then, or digital. And then we started working with the microcomputers, and I built the first version of the analytical tool called Performance Analyzer.
Now, when you say you built, what do you mean by that?
So I had a programmer, a team of technical guys, and I worked with them, and we built a tool that would consume data, electronic feeds to data, and do analysis of cost performance reports, trend charts, those type of things. So that was Performance Analyzer, and we did that for probably, 5 or 6 years, I guess. We worked on that project. And then the government decided it needed to be recompeted. And that was about when Windows came out, which had to be early 90s. And we had decided another coder that I worked with, who was by far the best I ever worked with, named Jim Price, we decided to start our own company and do a commercial product. And so we competed against the company that won the job to convert that DOS tool that we built to Windows. And so for the first few years, we had to compete against a free tool that the government gave away. So it was a little tough the first couple of years, but we eventually won that market, and we dominated that market for the next, well, as long as we owned it, the next like 10 years, and then we sold that product to Deltek, and it's done very well for them for another 10 years.
So you start CS Solutions was the first company, is that correct? Or was there...
The first company I worked for was a company called General Research. That's where I did the first tool.
Okay.
And then I actually worked for a company called Thomas Cyphers Inc., where we did some follow-on work on that DOS tool, but for the government.
Okay.
And then CS Solutions was the company that Jim Price and I started.
There's a lot more to move on with the story, but before we move on, there was this. I mean, I happened to be around at that time, and I had the opportunity to be a witness and to be part of some of that was going on. Mm-hmm. And part of that, what was surprising, was the development of a community that was centered around the development of a tool. And can you kind of talk about that? And were you surprised by that, or did that fit into your personality that just happened, or what happened there? How did that happen?
Well, I was very surprised at the size of the market. And so, when we originally built these tools, they were primarily used by the government to do analysis. And so, even, prior to wInsight, the DOS days, the tools weren't all that friendly. But when we started building a Windows-based tool, what we recognized was the market was actually growing, that there were other people interested in this data. And this is where I think, we had at least a small part in bringing integrated project management to get about, because people that were traditionally engineers that didn't look at this, it was very intuitive for them to go in and look at the data and find out what was going on. So what we found is we just had to change those tools a bit, and part of it was bringing the scheduled data into one view for everybody to look at. But the market for that type of information grew substantially when we put that tool in Windows and made it easy to use. Mm-hmm. And so we started capturing a lot of defense contractors and other government agencies. But what it did for a lot of the earned value people that used to be sort of in a cubicle hidden away, it brought them more to the forefront of the project management world, which was great. And so we created this ecosystem of people from all these companies and government agencies, and we would have our conferences. I know you went to some. And we would have over 350 people there that were interested in how to use these tools to better manage projects. And what we found, which was really rewarding to us, is people did things that we never even imagined with the tools. Right. We opened up APIs for people to be able to, program into the tools. People like Mitch Mueller and Eleanor Hopp, and I'm sure I'm leaving out other people, but they did things that we never even imagined with the tools. And that was probably the most rewarding thing. Is to see people take it, another step.
Where was the DCMA at that time?
In the earlier days, there wasn't DCMA. There were the AF pros, the NAF pros. So each service had their own people at the plant.
Okay.
And at some plants, it might be a NAV pro, and then the Air Force would delegate to them. So they didn't have a very strong role back in the early days. Okay. I'm not sure when DCMA came around. It was, I would say around 2000.
Okay.
And so they started then centralizing things more. In the earlier days, the services each had a representative on, the earned value. They called it the PIMJAG, and I don't remember what that stands for anymore, but the Air Force had a person, the Navy, the Army, and those guys really directed where earned value was going. And then all DCMA did was they were your on-site folks, they were the AFPRO, NAPRO at the time, but they were your eyes and ears on site. You could call and say, hey, I'm looking at this data, it doesn't look right, will you go talk to this CAM for me? But they typically had like one or two people on the review as opposed to really running the review. The programs ran the reviews.
When did it happen that it became a standard boilerplate that on a seed roll there would be an expectation that wInsight would be used or equivalent? Like how did that ever happen?
There was the whole idea of transferring data electronically, you had to do that if you were going to do any, real in-depth analysis. You didn't want to load that data by hand. So there was a file format called the X12839. It was a limited format, and we recognized that. So what we did was we came up with our own XML format, the wInsight one, and then we worked with the earned value vendors to either meet that spec, or we wrote the export for NPM and Artemis cost views. So it turned out the spec that we developed became the standard. And so they started writing in the wInsight XML into contracts, which from a tool standpoint, that's not a bad place to be.
No, it was not.
And so we equated, like Kleenex was the brand name for something, you'd use to blow your nose into a piece of paper.
Yeah.
We were sort of the Kleenex of earned value management.
Good place to be.
Yeah.
Right. So I kind of cut you off as you were telling the story about the history and where you were then, were in the stages. So can you carry on then as far as the transition from owning CS Solutions and the sale to Deltek? Can you kind of finish that story then?
Sure. So we it was 2006, and we had two companies interested in us, both Primavera and Deltek, and we looked at both of them, and we got the exact same offer from each one. I mean, down to the dollar, everything was exactly the same, and we thought about where we thought our people would be best placed, and we thought that, Deltek had a very professional management team in place, and they had a lot of different products, so we thought it was a good place. So we did sell to Deltek, and they took wInsight over, and they put together a good package of tools like Cobra and NPM, and and they've done well with the tool for a decade.
And so now where are we now as far as your own involvement in the industry?
So I retired. I never really thought I'd come back to work, but after a couple years, I found that retirement wasn't all it was cracked up to be. Is that, you go out during the week, and if you go to the golf course, there's people there that are 80 years old, and there's people there that are in their 20s with a substance abuse problem. Then they want to bet you for golf. They want to play for money, and I just wasn't very rewarding for me. So I had a non-compete. I taught at DAU, Defense Acquisition University, for a couple years. I did some consulting, and then Jim and I were talking one day, and we said, it looks like there's some interesting things happening technology-wise. It looks like there's interesting things happening with the government with this integrated program management push. So we think there's some things that we could do to make a difference in this market. And so we stepped back and we looked at what technology was available out there, how we do it differently. We took what I learned at DAU and consulting with program managers and CAMs, and we came out with Empower, which we think is a great product, and it's really designed to engage, all the stakeholders in a program. And since it's completely browser-based, that was two things we thought, that limited people from getting to tools. And one was them being accessible. Do I have to go install a Windows-based app on everybody's machine? That takes a lot of IT resources. So we said, no, this one's going to be completely browser-based. So all you need is URL. And the other one was just strictly ease of use. And so you've got these different roles of users out there throughout your organization. And what an earned value analyst needs is much more than a program manager needs. So having a system with adaptable menus where you can really reduce the amount of selections for a senior manager or a CAM or even a government analyst. So making the tools really easy to use and very accessible was our goal in coming back into the market.
So what do you feel like you're at a place where you're in the current of how the whole technology is moving, and this whole integration of the various kinds of analysis tools, and where it may be headed in the future? Can you kind of talk about what it is like now, where you fit into it, and where does it seem to be, the flow does it seem to be?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things going on. I think one is, like when I owned CS Solutions, we had multiple servers. We had phone system servers, we had database servers, we had servers for the application developers. We don't have a single server in Encore Analytics. All of our stuff's in the cloud, with cloud providers like Amazon or Microsoft Azure. And I think in terms of where this industry is going, and every industry is that getting rid of that infrastructure and putting things out on the cloud. And so they're starting to get over these hurdles with security. The intelligence community has duplicated the Amazon infrastructure behind their walls, air gapped, so they can turn servers on and off and spin them up. And so, all the tools need to be built to work in that cloud environment. And then if there's data out there that you need to tap into in another source, you need to build tools that will adapt like that. So, there's cost data, there's schedule data, there's risk data, there's detailed accounting data about who charged my account that I might want to know about. All those things reside in typically separate systems. So being able to access those and integrate them is the key.
In that, though, and it is not a rebuttal, but it's just a question I think that a lot of people would have is there a risk of our losing our identity about the uniqueness, the specific role that integrated program management has been associated with earned value? Is there that possibility, or is that, if there is that possibility, is that a bad thing even? Is that a good thing, or have you thought about that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, I've been to many places to sell our tools and even do consulting and things. And so, I run into managers that say, I don't like earned value. Earned value is just too costly. Okay, so my response to them is, what part of earned value don't you like? Do you not like understanding the work and then breaking it down into detail? Is that what you don't like, is having a good understanding of the scope? Is it that you don't like assigning those bits of scope to people? Is it that you don't like scheduling out that work once you figure out what it's supposed to be? And so when you finally drill down to say, well, it's really basic project management, except all I want you to do, once you've done all the things you have to do to manage well, I want you to pick an objective earned value technique and put it down there and say, this is how I know when done is done, right? And so when you peel back that onion and you say, well, you're going to understand the scope, right? And then you're going to schedule it, and then you're going to track it, right? Even without earned value, you're going to do all those things. What it turns out that they don't really like is the visibility it gives people. It's not so much, because they got to do most of the work anyway. I'd say they do 90% of the work anyway. So I don't view earned value as this little thing where we just do an earned value technique. It's overall project management, it's risk management. We've always had those things in CSC, if you want to call it that, or earned value, or whatever you want to call it. It's just basic sound project management. And it's an objective way to measure where you are. I don't think that no matter what you call it, there will be people like us in the programs making sure that people understand what they need to do and when they need to do it based on, what our current schedule is.
How do you think the transitions that are going on right now with DCMA, the fact that there is this major step back from what surveillance was like a few years ago to what it's like now, and that it's going through this transition of developing a tool-based approach toward identifying unique, specific things rather than having a schedule of going into the plan and seeing things on a monthly basis? Like, how is the transition of DCMA's role affecting the identity of integrated program management?
Well, I think we're on a journey. I don't think anybody knows that just yet. So I think that, the concept of using data to save manpower is a good concept. I think that we're going to have a few years where it's not going to save manpower. It may actually consume more, because as we've run through a lot of these data checks with our customers, it flags things that are, it's not that there's a problem there, it's that the data isn't fine-tuned enough. And so, when you're reconciling the time phase BCWS, the budget spread, with the baseline schedule, if people are using something like schedule margin activities and you don't have a way to identify those, it looks like this cost and schedule's out of whack when it's not really. So I think there's going to be some growing pains in this, but I think if you look at, even how the big 8 accounting firms do auditing, they don't go in and ask just for a set of books and then sit accountants down there to go through the books. They have tools that point them in the right direction. Mm-hmm. So automated tools. And they have a lot of automated tools to help them work through the audit in a very systematic approach. So I think anything you can do to streamline that process for DCMA is good for DCMA and good for the taxpayer, because people aren't working on an audit, they're building product, right? So I think it's a step in the right direction. I think that some people have misinterpreted this as a DCMA stepping back and maybe not being so serious about this, when I don't think that's the case.
Okay. You have given back in a lot of ways that I know about, and I probably don't even have a hint of all the ways that you have given back to the industry. But one of the ways I know that you've been very involved is with the College of Performance Management. what role does it have to play to serve?
Okay. So, this organization, CPM, goes back a long way. It was called PMA before, and it was part of PMI for a little while, and then they came out of PMI for a number of reasons. But CPM has had an extremely important role in training people. They probably train more people in the discipline of earned value management than everybody else combined. So those conferences have training tracks every morning, and the people that do that, they do it for free. Most of them come and they pay for the conference. They get a little bit of discount, but then they teach for free. So that's been a big thing. Also, I think they, provided leadership. The NDIA IPMD subcommittee, they do a lot of the policy work more than CPM does. But I would say CPM is really instrumental to people that are actually where the rubber meets the road at programs, that they can come and hear about best practices, go to workshops. And then we've had not a certification program, but a certificate program for a number of years, where people could come and get trained and test, and they could take that back to their office, and that was great for promotions and transportability of what their skills are. Mm-hmm. In the last couple of years, we've decided to upgrade that to a full certification, and so there'll be a basic and an intermediate and advanced certification, and I think that really helps people with their professional career in terms of having a portable, credential within the industry. So it's a fantastic organization, and I tell you, the number of hours people put into that is just phenomenal in their own time. And there's been some people like Susan Wood and Wayne Abba and Eleanor Hopp and Neil Albert. Gary Humphreys was the second president. But I mean, he's put in untold hours as well. I don't want to leave people out. Dale Gillum, Buddy Everidge, those are people that are on the board with me. Kim Henderson, Lauren Bone. I know I'm going to forget people. I'm going to feel bad about it. But over the years, people have just built a tremendous training program and donated that time.
You mentioned a little bit earlier about the fact that you retired for a short period of time, then you've come back. But that does bring to a question in my mind. We all do this, is there any way when you look back that you wish that if you'd had the chance to go back and do something differently than what you've done, or how it's worked out? Well, is there anything like that you wish you could go back and just have that second chance to do something?
I think when you're young, you're always in a hurry to get somewhere. And I think that if I had it to do over again, I probably would have stayed in the Air Force a little bit longer. I really enjoyed that job. I would have liked to take a crack at pilot training. I regret that. I did learn to fly later in life, and right. I do that, for myself now. And I enjoy that, but I think that when you're young, there's things like that you can do, and you don't ever have that opportunity again. Doesn't matter how much money you have or how much time you have, you can never go back and do those things.
Sure.
So that's probably it. I don't have any other regrets.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think of you and I think of cost management. I think of all the things we can do with the incredible tool that you developed with wInsight. But do you have any thoughts about how we could or should, or we are now perhaps connecting with schedule better?
Yeah, so when I was lieutenant in the Air Force and we went on reviews, we had probably 10 or so people that really focused on cost and looking at work authorization documents and checking everything out. And we had one scheduling guru, and he went off and did his own thing. And we didn't do a very good job of saying, did really all this stuff mesh together? We checked everything independently. And so probably starting in the late 90s, early 2000, things started to shift into, everything's based on the schedule. Everything that we do, all the resource loading, if the schedule's no good, then the cost data is no good, right? Because we may not have resources in the right time frame, and we've got time-phased rates. So we saw that shift starting to come, and that, today is something that we really focus on, is a much more integrated, holistic approach. Does all this make sense? And that's where the integrated baseline reviews came in. That wasn't so much of, does their system description make sense? Or are they doing, does all this stuff fit together? Do the pieces fit together? Does it make sense for a program? Is all the scope contained? And so when we would take a cost guy in like me, I couldn't tell if all the scope was contained.
Right.
I couldn't really tell if the schedule was reasonable for designing a engine or something.
Right.
So I think this whole approach of getting technical people more involved has made a big difference, and that is a battle that we will always fight, because technical people want to build technical things. They would rather look at a technical spec and they'd rather go to a test, but we have to have those people engaged for this to be meaningful, right? Mm-hmm. So that shift has been, I think, really good for the whole industry, and we're now part of an integrated team as opposed to being off on the side.
Is schedule starting to drive the ship a little bit more than cost, or how is that transition? Is there a transition there?
Yeah, I do believe that schedule really is driving. People know that the most important thing for a program manager to understand is, what was I supposed to be doing? What did I get done? What do I have to do to get back on track? Okay. And that's schedule, right? And the cost will fall out of that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as a management tool, day to day, week to week, schedule is king. And then cost will fall in line.
So let me just kind of change that to another tack in the same area, and that has to do with Agile. And that is, I know, for instance, that there are some difficulties that are being faced right now with finding what are the right kind of metrics that might be used to determine whether there is a good management of the levels below, let's say, the work package in the Agile environment. That's the basis for that determination of performance being made based upon QBDs. Like, it's in where do you see the development of a supporting tool or methods to have more of a cohesion there?
Well, first let me say I'm not an Agile expert.
Okay.
So I'm not going to claim to be a person that's done that at places, defense contractors. But I will tell you, we've been doing Agile development on our tools for 25 years. We do, we put a list of requirements out there. We decide which ones we're going to work on. Some of them take longer than others, but we don't. And, we'll slide things out to the next release if one seems to fit better out there. So we were never hamstrung like, say, the early CSC days of, this is the scope of work and we're going to finish this time and we're not done until we finish all that. And I think software lends itself very well to Agile because, you can always go back and tweak the code. It's not like I built a piece of hardware and I've got to go back and now change that piece of hardware. And so, I think the things from my perspective, what I look at is we make the list of requirements that we're going to do. And as we're getting to the end of that sprint, I look at the ones that fall off. And I have an order of magnitude of what I thought the amount of work was going to take to do that. And that's sort of my schedule variance, right? Mm-hmm. And then, some things, as we get through them, we end up not doing those for whatever reason. They weren't as good ideas as we thought. We work with it and that one falls off the list. So when you try and integrate Agile with earned value, I'm still, to me, not clear about, scope going away, which it does sometimes in an Agile environment, and what you do with those things get pushed to the next sprint. Does that show up as a schedule variance until it's finally caught up another sprint? I've not worked with that, but I'm sure it can be done. But for software, I think Agile is the way to manage things.
So we're headed in the right direction, but we don't have it all working together totally perfectly yet. Would you say that would be true?
Yeah, I would say there's still things to do to figure that out, and there's smart people out there working on that.
Okay. Now, in regard to the whole development of the tool-based approach toward surveillance, have you seen any impact on how that trial is going on in any of the audits that you've been doing or anything?
Yeah, so what we have done, we do support some of the consulting firms that are going in and they want to do the data-driven audits, because they know that's what the government's going to do. So we'll send a person from our team in to get data loaded up and run those. And it really is interesting how you can focus in on certain areas. You immediately see, hey, there's problems here, either in the scheduling or the cost or the integration. And then being able to drill that right down to, is it a systematic problem? Meaning, does the contractor have a problem with integrated cost schedule, just for an example? Or is it this one CAM over here that doesn't understand it and it's a training problem? So those things become evident very quickly, where we used to spend days figuring those things out, or maybe we never even saw them. We missed those things. And so you can send a team out very well armed with specific things to go out and look at, as opposed to sort of, searching around in the dark. They become immediately apparent.
With the development of the possibility of the Format 7 and the kind of visibility that we'll have with that, is that connecting with what you're saying there as far as being able to get a clearer picture of what's going on more readily?
Yeah, so, you know, we've been able to transfer most all the data that's in the Format 7 for 20 years. You know, you could get detailed time phase data down to the element of cost at the work package level. Traditionally, the government didn't get that, but it's been coming into tools for a long time. But I think the key is being able to now hook it up to this schedule data that's coming from another system and integrating it really well.
Yeah. And
then getting all the attributes that you need to test them, because they weren't all there. Things like believe it or not, the IPMR cost format still doesn't have earned value technique in it because they never thought it would go down to a work package level. So we had ways of putting it in there, but there was no standardization of what do we call LOE or percent complete or 50-50. The codes for those, there's no standard.
Right.
So when you try and build a tool that goes across multiple contractors and then pull statistics out about how many work packages are LOE, a lot of work to normalize that data. So I think the key really is, you know, with the Format 7, it normalizes that data now, so I can take it and run consistent analytics on it at a very detailed level. How we do some of the tests, whether it's material account, you know, product, you know, we're buying, you know, steel or whatever, versus a labor account, the tests that you run are different. So knowing exactly how we code material accounts versus labor accounts, and how we identify summary level planning packages versus planning packages, all those things have to be done exactly right, or we get bad results out and we get false positive triggers that we waste time tracking down and go, oh, the reason why this looks so bad is because it wasn't coded properly. That's my biggest fear for the next couple of years, is we're going to be chasing a lot of those.
That's where you're talking about maybe it's going to be a little bit labor intensive for a while until we get all these things worked out.
Correct.
Excellent. Okay. Well, just with a kind of a closing here, closing moments, if some of the people that are watching this, I hope, are people that are starting out in this industry. Mm-hmm. And maybe that young professional who's still trying to get his or her feet on the ground and making sure they're headed in the right direction. What would you say to someone who's coming into this field and where it's at today about what you'd recommend? What do they need to know? What should they focus on? How can they have confidence in themselves and what they're doing?
So I would say that the first thing, and it's sort of how we've structured the certification for CPM, is, you know, to get a good basis of the big picture. Everybody needs to understand where they fit in the cog to be useful, right? So understand, you know, work management, you know, how we divvy out the scope, understand what a contract is, understand, you know, how the cost and schedule relates with each other. And I would say, you know, don't get pigeonholed in any one field early on, you know. And I would say that if you really want to have job security, become a good scheduler, because it crosses every industry. And I think America is, you know, we don't manufacture widgets anymore, but we do a lot of big projects, and we do them all over the world. And it doesn't matter whether it's a defense or it's oil or whatever, they always need good schedulers. And a good scheduler builds the foundation for everything else. Mm-hmm. And so, but, you know, go in there, do some scheduling, do some cost estimating, understand how people come up with estimates, because it's a fascinating skill, and, you know, it's very methodical. They call them cost estimating relationships, and how you build that model and do that. I did that as a lieutenant, and so I understand that. And so as you start building these building blocks, you know, then you can become, you know, the head of program control, or, you know, even if you want to segue into owning your own company, you know, I have an accounting degree. I never practiced accounting, but it was a good foundation for me to own a business. I understood how to talk to an accountant. I understood taxes. I understood all those things. And then I learned project management, you know, how to build a schedule in the Air Force and how to manage it. So when I went to start my own company and build software, I had the tools to do that. I had to figure out how to build software after that, but that was, you know, that was fun. So I would say to the young people, you know, go to a bunch of different parts of this, you know, do scheduling, do cost, learn those trades well, and and there's a great career out there for you.